What's up, guys? My name is Casey, and this is eBay Miniature Rescues. Today, we're going to take a look at three very different models, starting back in good old 1984. Man, I wish it was 1985. There probably could have been a great Back to the Future joke in there. Oh well. So about a month ago, I was contacted by a subscriber who was looking to have a few models painted. The project was to paint three minis from three different time periods. A TSR Black Suit Spider-Man from the early 80s, a Gallo Miniatures Pewter Spidey from the mid-90s, and a super sweet Venom model from last year's Marvel Crisis Protocol. Now, normally I don't paint new models on this channel, but it's not every day that you get a chance to see the evolution of models dating back from the early 80s. I mean, I wasn't even born yet when this first model came out. Let's start with the oldest mini. This is a TSR Black Suit Spider-Man from 1984. TSR is the company that was founded by Gary Gygax and Don Kay in 1973. They self-published Dungeons & Dragons. In 1984, TSR published Marvel Superheroes the role-playing game under license from Marvel. The basic game was designed to let players assume the roles of superheroes from Marvel Comics such as Spider-Man, Daredevil, Hulk, etc. The game was designed to be pretty easy to understand, and the simple version was found in a little battle book from the basic set. It contained a bare-bones combat system sufficient enough to resolve comic book-style superheroic fights. It's definitely something pretty awesome to see. You know, a model like this that's survived the ages. It's not particularly fancy, but pewter casting back then really wasn't what it is today. And it really only allowed for basic ideas to come to life. But you definitely get what this model is. You know, it's a Spider-Man model, it even has the little web shooter fingers going on. That's pretty cool. In order to give this model a fresh look, I first have to strip the old paint off. Unfortunately, my sonic cleaner blew up, again, probably from overuse, but just dunking this guy into some LA's Totally Awesome overnight and the paint came off pretty easily. Starting with black primer, I give the model an all-over coat. Then, in order to give the black a little bit more interest, I add some blue into the pot. This just gives a little bit more of a highlight from above and makes the model a little bit more interesting to look at. With MEPHISTON red, I filled in all of the bricks. I chose this red for two reasons. First, it's bright and I know I'm going to be washing it in order to pull out those brick details. And second, it was the brightest red within arm's reach. Oftentimes, when you are painting pieces of terrain or bases, grabbing the closest color that matches what you're going to do will generally do for the job. Washes, layers, and highlights will almost always cover up your first coat. So anything close will generally do. In this case, MEPHISTON red is probably what I would have gone for anyway, so it kind of all works out at the end. Coming in with CITADEL's gray SEER, I'm going to go over the spider emblem that wraps around his entire body. Using a gray like this will make it much easier to cover with a brighter color later. It also has much better coverage over black than pretty much any white out there. After the gray is dry, I hit the whole thing with VALLEJO white. You can see that the coverage is way better than if I had just come in with pure white to begin with. I highly recommend gradually stepping up to white if you are painting over pretty much any color, but especially black. Your whites won't look thick and chalky if you keep your layers thin and build up the color slowly. With Eshin Gray, I'm going to thin this down quite a bit with some water and place highlights on the uppermost areas of the model. Since this model is so small and there isn't a whole lot of detail, adding a few highlights really starts to bring out the shape of this model. Nuln oil to wash the bricks brings in that detail and darkens down the red. Coming back in with MEPHISTON red, I'm going to pick out all of the bricks, leaving the shade in the recesses. Then, with just a touch of white, I place a highlight on each edge of the bricks. This gives it a kind of comic book appearance and pretty much finishes this model. The next model we have was a little harder to track down information on. From what I could find, Gallo Pewter was a company that made quite a bit of pewter models from the late 80s through the mid 90s. They made Marvel sets for collectors and a Marvel chess set with a ton of different characters. They also manufactured a bunch of non-Marvel miniatures, mostly fantasy models, likely aimed at the Dungeons & Dragons crowd. There isn't a ton of information about the company online, which is unfortunate because the sculpts look pretty good. Let's start by priming the model black and giving it a zenithal highlight with white ink from above. I want to make sure I can see everything on this model. This model was made in the early 90s, not too long after the black suit Spidey, but you can see that there's a lot more detail and movement going on with this model. I'm going to start with a nice bright blue for the suit. I'm trying to follow the art that I found online for Spider-Man suits from this era. I want it to match as best as it can to the time that this guy came out. From there, I'm going to use MEPHISTON red to fill in the rest of the suit. Already, we are getting a pretty nice look for our traditional Spider-Man. Chaos Black to fill in the emblem and around the eyes. Then a liberal coating of Nuln oil to fill in all of the webbing details in the suit. This model is quite a bit more dynamic than the last one, so darkening down the whole suit will give us an opportunity to highlight a little more deliberately. Coming back in with the base colors, I can pick out the individual squares on the suit and place highlights in areas that would have a lot more light. Then using a small dry brush, I'm going to go over all of the red. Because I placed highlights before this with a brush, those areas are going to be a lot more opaque than the rest of the model. So the highlights will stand out a little bit more in those areas. With Magic Blue, I'm going to layer over the same areas, just leaving the wash in the recesses. And that pretty much takes care of this model. I really like the sculpt of this one. It has a lot more movement to it, and the pose is much more dynamic. It's amazing how far pewter had come in only just a few years. But of course, these days we don't tend to see much pewter anymore. There are still companies making pewter models, and that technology has come a very long way. But for the final model, we will be taking a look at Venom from the 2019 game Marvel Crisis Protocol. Much like the models we see coming from our favorite manufacturers, this mini has been sculpted and molded for painting. It came in a model box on sprues. I start with black primer, and much like the first model, I added a little bit of blue to give that black more interest from above. From below, I sprayed a fairly thin coat of Nagaroth Night, so that there was a little bit of a purple tint in the shadows. I find that when I'm painting black, there are only so many directions that you can really go with it. By adding a little bit of color variation to the model, it can still read as black, but it's much more interesting to look at than just a pure black. To brighten up that blue a little bit, I'm going to use some INCUBI darkness on the uppermost parts of the muscles. There's a little bit of blue and green in this paint, so we're building off the idea that color will bring more interest. And since it's a lighter shade, you'll be able to see that a little bit better. After that dries, I'm going to take some of that INCUBI darkness and add a little bit of white. I want to broadly highlight some of the muscles, so there's a nice highlight to each one. At this point, we are getting away from black a little bit, but we'll take care of that a little bit later. Using gray SEER and VALLEJO white, I'm going to take care of the spider emblem that wraps around Venom. I've seen this done in two different ways. The box art for Venom shows an outline of the spider, where every other piece of art shows it's fully filled in. I chose to go with filled in. These models are based on the comic books, and it would be weird not to default to that look. Honestly, I think somebody just messed up the box art for this one. MEPHISTON red for the tongue. And while that's drying, I'm going to come in with some LIQUITEX black ink and start to line the emblem as well as some of the deeper lines on the body. This will give us our darkest shadows and create some of that comic book appearance. A purple wash for the tongue, which is nice over red in general, but we'll also tie our purples together in all of those shadowy areas. Then, using MEPHISTON red and adding Cadian flesh tone for each subsequent highlight, I'm going to brighten up his tongue. In order to tie all of the broad highlights and colors together, I'm going to employ a black oil wash. This will give us an overcoat of black that really pushes the shadows down. I probably could have done this with Null Oil, but I wanted to be sure that I could control this wash as much as possible. Wiping off my brush, I'm able to come back in on the highlight points and wipe away some of the oils. This will bring back the highlights in specific areas, and if I need to blend that back, I can just add a little bit more oil wash. It's a very easy to work with medium and extremely forgiving. I gotta say, these new Marvel minis are really nice. It's very much like painting a Games Workshop model. The plastic is very similar, and the sculpts I've seen are outstanding. I still haven't played the game, but I've heard it's pretty fun, and I think it's something I'd like to look into, see what it's all about. The last thing I'm going to do is... Holy crap, yeah?
Excuse me. Did you know that this video went out a day early?
Well, yeah, I did. I scheduled it on purpose.
Well, it's early. Today is Saturday, not Sunday.
I know, but if you let me explain, just for a minute.
Yeah.
A guy, I swear. Yes, this video is out a day early, and that is for a very specific reason. Normally, I release videos on Sunday at 9 a.m., but this week, I just had to get this video out a day early because one of these models is a gift. Max, this Venom is just for you, man. Happy birthday from your dad and Nana, and happy birthday from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was a most excellent project. I don't get to work with non-GW models very often, and I'm very happy to have painted these. It's not very often that you get to work, with models from 3 different time periods, and it was pretty fascinating to see the differences. They all had their quirks, but through and through, they have personality of Marvel characters. And with that, thank... My God, I thought you left.
No. Your shoe is untied. Don't be so gullible, McFly.
Thank you once again for joining me on another eBay miniature rescue. If you liked something about this video, please hit that like button. And for more rescues each week, please consider subscribing. Once again, I'm Casey, and I will see you in the next video. And I do apologize that I'm sick. It sucks.